The day before the service, the furniture comes out. In a farmhouse in Amish country, the big downstairs room is emptied, chairs carried into the barn, the kitchen table pushed against a wall, and in their place come long wooden benches, hauled 2 men at a time from a black wagon parked in the lane. The benches have no backs. They are plain pine, smooth from decades of use, smelling faintly of sawdust and old varnish. Nobody is decorating. No flowers, no candles, no banners, not even a cross on the wall. Because this room isn't being readied for a party. Tomorrow morning, it will become a church. If you want to go deeper than the stereotypes, past the postcards and the reality shows, subscribe, and come with us into the real rhythm of Amish life. And tell us in the comments, would you trade your pew for a backless bench? We read every single one. Most of us carry the same picture of church. A steeple against the sky. Rows of polished pews. Stained glass throwing color across the floor. Maybe an organ, warming up before the first hymn. The Old Order Amish carry a different picture, and at the center of it is a fact that surprises almost everyone: there is no church building. Not one. The Amish do not build churches, do not own them, do not drive to them. Across more than 1,900 congregations in North America, worship happens in private homes, held every other Sunday in most communities, rotating from household to household through the year until every family in the district has hosted its turn young center for Anabaptist and Pietist studies. A church district is small, typically 25 to 35 families, around 100 to 150 people, small enough that the largest room in a farmhouse can hold them all. Amish village. And if worship isn't at your house on a given Sunday, you may spend the day quietly at home, or visit family, or attend in a neighboring district. Before we step inside, one note: forget the reality TV Amish for a moment. The shows that claim to film this world are widely reported as heavily staged, and they are not part of the documentary record. What follows is the practice as scholars and local reporting have documented it, and even that practice changes, gently, from place to place, from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, to Holmes County, Ohio, to LaGrange, Indiana, and across the affiliations from Old Order to New Order to Schwarzentuber. The frame holds, the details vary. Because the church is a gathering and not a building, the gathering has to travel. This is where the bench wagon comes in, one of the most quietly astonishing pieces of community infrastructure in America. A long black wagon, drawn by a horse, carrying the district's wooden benches, its hymnals, its dishes. Those benches are community property, along with the hymn books. They are just about the only things the whole district owns together. Amish 365. When the wagon rolls into a farm lane, the whole neighborhood knows the meaning without a word: church will be here, on Sunday. The day before, the work begins. The big room is cleared, and the benches are set in rows, 1 bench per family, arranged so the room can breathe. Where a home can't practically hold 120 people, the gathering moves to a basement, a barn, or a large workshop. The Amish writer Lavina Eicher once described her district holding services in the local schoolhouse when the farmhouse ran short of room. The Amish cook, young center. The point holds wherever the room is, no special place, no sacred architecture. Only the gathered people. Sunday morning comes early. Around 9, the buggies start to arrive, row after row along the lane, horses tied in the shade with the boys of the district watching over them. Amish 365. Dust on the road. The clink of harness. Then the door opens, and the room reveals its first unspoken rule. The women are already seated. The men enter in order: ministers and older men first, then younger married men, and last of all, the unbaptized youth and boys. Amish America. Men settle on one side, women on the other, facing each other across the floor. Children sit with their parents, small ones in laps. The older youth sit together in a section of their own, as they will until they join the church young center. It may look like simple arrangement, but the seating is a living document, written by something the Amish call the Ordnung, the community's shared, largely unwritten understanding of how life is to be lived. The room is arranged the way it is on purpose, and we'll come back to how that purpose works. look around, and the contrast with the picture in your head sharpens. No altar. No candles. No organ, no piano, no choir. No pulpit, no bulletins, no stained glass, no crosses. Young Center, Amish village. The walls may be bare, the floor plain wood, the light from ordinary windows. A visitor might call it austere. A member might simply call it plain, the same word the community uses for itself. The first sound is the singing. Slow, unison, in German, from the Ausbund, the oldest Anabaptist hymnal still in use, first printed in 1564, carrying hymns written by Anabaptist prisoners held in a castle dungeon at Passau in the 1530s Amish America. There are no musical notes in the book, the tunes live only in memory, passed ear to ear across 4.5 centuries. The preaching is spoken in Pennsylvania Dutch, the language of home. The scriptures are read in High German, the formal language of the faith. Amish village, Young Center. And one detail almost nobody knows from the outside, as the opening hymn unfolds, the ministers quietly slip out of the room to decide among themselves who will preach. No one, not even the preachers, knows until the last verse fades who will rise. Amish America, Young Center. The hymn trails off. The room settles into a stillness so complete you can hear boot soles on the floorboards. A man stands. He stands a long moment before he speaks. 120 people, holding one breath. Then a single voice rises, unhurried, the Vorsinger, the song leader, and the room answers as one. No instruments. No harmony. Everyone sings the same note, in unison, in German, and the pace is astonishingly slow, every syllable drawn out, a single hymn stretching 15, even 20 minutes. Amish America. The reason is not lack of skill. The unhurried rhythm makes it almost impossible for any one voice to rise above the rest. The singing becomes one corporate sound. Scholars read this as worship built around Gelassenheit, the deep Anabaptist value of yieldedness, the stilling of the self-crabil, the riddle of Amish culture. It is hymnody designed so that nobody can show off, not even with a beautiful voice. Early in nearly every service comes the hymn the community loves best, Das Loblied, the song of praise, sung before a word of preaching. Amish 365. Then the deacon stands and reads the scripture in High German. One minister rises for an opening sermon of about half an hour. When he sits, another man stands for the main sermon, an hour, sometimes more, and in many districts a third adds a short testimony at the end. Amish America. No microphone. No notes. The sermons turn again and again on the same deep waters: humility, obedience, baptism, the yielding of the self, the cost of discipleship. Young Center. Put the whole morning together: hymns, readings, 2 sermons, prayers spoken while the congregation kneels, and it typically runs about 3 hours on those backless benches. In some districts, a little longer. Amish America. And now the question the room has carried all morning answers itself: why call a farmhouse a church? Because for the Amish, the church is not the building, it is the gathered body. This is the old Anabaptist conviction, carried from the 16th century. The assembly of believers is the church, and no roof can add to it. When the last buggy leaves this lane, the farmhouse becomes an ordinary farmhouse again. The sacredness traveled out with the people. In a culture that consecrates cathedrals, the Amish consecrate a morning. The seating, too, gives up its secret. Remember the unspoken rule: men enter in order, elders first, then the young, and the room is arranged the same way. Age and standing in the church decide the placement, not wealth, not education, not talent. In that ordering, the whole Ordnung is written in furniture. And in the middle of it sit the children, the quietest congregation you'll ever see. Babies held, toddlers stilled, school-age boys and girls sitting through a service that runs past noon, with no phones and no toys. Nobody entertains them, they learn by watching. Young Center. The last hymn fades. The congregation kneels for the final prayer, the silence ringing. And then comes the moment every visitor remembers: the benches come back to life. They are turned on their sides and laid across, and within minutes the church has become a dining room, the same plain boards now long tables, set with the district's own dishes, carried in from the bench wagon. The meal is as plain as the worship, bread with the famous homemade peanut butter spread, cheese, pickles, cookies, coffee or water, a light lunch, because the afternoon belongs to visiting Amish 365, Amish Village. One newspaper food columnist who hosts her district's service writes of feeding more than 100 guests before the morning ends, a meal that is, in its way, as much a part of the worship as the sermon the Amish cook. The buggies pull out of the lane, and the farmhouse eases back into being a farmhouse. But before we ride on, there is one more question that morning leaves hanging in the air, the one almost nobody outside the faith thinks to ask. Who was that man who stood up to preach? How does a person become an Amish preacher in the first place? The short answer, he doesn't become one. He is chosen, by a slip of paper hidden inside a hymn book, in a ceremony most districts hold perhaps once in a decade or two. Yoder, the Amish cook. The weeks before an ordination, the district prays about its vacancy. Members privately name the men they believe God may be calling. In many districts, any man who receives 4 or more names stands in the lot. There is no campaigning. The whole idea of a campaign is what the lot exists to prevent. Some of the men in the lot are praying they won't be chosen. Yoder, the Amish cook. Then the bishop places a row of identical hymn books on a table before the congregation, one book for each candidate. In exactly one, hidden, lies a thin slip of paper bearing a verse from Proverbs. The lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord. Gamio, lot. One at a time, the candidates step forward and take a book. Their wives sit beside them, because a calling like this falls on a household, not just a man. The bishop opens the books, one after another, while the whole room waits. The Global Anabaptist Mennonite Encyclopedia Online describes these services as loaded with tension, expectancy, and uncertainty, one of the very few times when direct divine action can be visibly experienced in the room. The practice reaches back to the book of Acts, to the casting of lots that chose Matthias to take the place of Judas. The Amish read it the same way today. The book decides, and the book, through God, decides rightly. Gamio, lot. When the slip is found, the chosen man stands, and the bishop lays a hand on his head and commissions him on the spot, a minister now, for the rest of his life. No salary, because there is none. No seminary, because there is none. He keeps his farm, he preaches from memory, without notes, in Pennsylvania Dutch, often within weeks. Gamio, young center. And here the story becomes a family. In rural Illinois, the Amish writer Gloria Yoder chronicled her district's ordination in her weekly column The Amish Cook, a real ordination, 15 years after the previous one. Her cousin Josh, who had spent the year talking and praying with her, drew the book with the slip in it. He had told her the night before, I told God a long time ago that he can do with my life what he wants, so it's up to him. Josh is a father of 5, a farmer, a man who works with his oldest son at a sawmill, and his own child, giggling, announced, we are going to the preacher's house. The community pays its ministers nothing. The support comes in other currency, meals brought, work shared. Yoder, the Amish cook. Now the morning answers itself completely. When the ministers slipped into that back room to decide who would preach, they were men who had each once opened a hymn book and found their lives changed. The church that builds no buildings also builds no careers. Leadership is not climbed to, not applied for. It falls, like the slow unison singing that lets no voice rise above another. The Amish hold one of the oldest continuous traditions of leadership selection in the Western world, built on a single radical trust, that God does the choosing, and the community need only be brave enough to open the books. And so the circle closes. The plain room. The backless benches. The unaccompanied singing in a language 400 years old. The sermons from memory, by men who never asked to preach. The meal that rises out of the benches. And the next farmhouse, already moving its furniture, 2 weeks out on the same road. The Amish do not build a church, they become one, every other Sunday, led by men chosen the way the apostles chose Matthias. It is, in every sense, a gathered faith. And after 4.5 centuries, the gathering is still holding.